And we're back with another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Today, hey, it's Baldur's Gate 3, baby. It has been a long time since there's been a Baldur's Gate, which, if you're not familiar, is top-down tactical Western RPG that was originally created by BioWare. Now, I've been particularly interested in this entry because it's coming to us by way of Larian Studios, the same people who made Divinity, Original Sin 1 and 2, which are some of the best RPGs ever, in my opinion, so perfect fit. I mean, these are some of the most beloved RPGs of all time, so high expectations, and if anyone can do it, it's Larian. Big thing I have to mention here is this game is in early access. That means you cannot play it from start to finish. It's not possible. You can currently only play part of the first act, which is a pretty big chunk of the game. Larian is saying about 20 to 25 hours at the moment, but it's not even close to being the entire game. Currently, the game has 6 classes. You can play as 9 different races and sub-races. There are more planned to be added later. The game also incorporates multiplayer, so multiple people can play through the campaign, much like how it worked in the Divinity Original Sin games. So it needs to be said there are a few things that are different here. The game, for instance, is not a direct continuation of any of the story of the original Baldur's Gate games, so if that's what you're looking for, it's not there. That's not a bad thing. It's not a value judgment. And the game is more of a continuation of the series in spirit. It is set actually 100 years after the events of Baldur's Gate 2 and its expansion, so we may see some returning characters from previous games, but that story ended with Throne of Baal, the expansion to Baldur's Gate 2. The game opens with your character escaping a crashing Mind Flayer ship. As the game progresses, you recruit other survivors of the crash, with all of them having the same problem: a Mind Flayer tadpole stuck in their head that'll eventually turn them into one of the crazy tentacle guys. So that's the setup for the game, and honestly, it's a hell of a hook. You have to deal with Mind Flayers in a memorable section of Baldur's Gate 2, but it's nothing as crazy as this. Right out of the gate, you get expansive character creation options. It is impressive. What I like about the game in particular is it feels like they give you a lot of choices, but without it being overwhelming. They do a good job separating everything out, so you're not immediately hit with like some kind of information overload. And from our experience, the game does a great job with the default settings for each class. Obviously, you're free to modify things slightly to your liking, but if you go with what the game gives you, you should do fine. It's not going to be a disaster. By its nature, it's a little more rigid than the character building system in Divinity Original Sin 2. The classes are more locked into their specific roles, but it does make it so that there are less traps to fall into when building your character, so it balances out pretty well. And anybody who did go through character creation in the original Baldur's Gate games, you do not have to roll for stats in this one. Just uses a regular old point-buy system, so yeah, you're not wasting time with that. And I know that some people like that, but truthfully, it's a bit of a hassle when you could just be using a point-buy system. The original Baldur's Gate games were based off Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, so you had some quirks like armor score going down as it got better. Baldur's Gate is based off Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, the newest one, so a lot of the underlying mechanics are simplified, especially compared to the kind of confusing rules governing the original games. The game is, however, brutal right out of the gate. It does not take much to die, and you will want to save a lot. Experimentation is obviously key, just like with the previous Larian Divinity games. There are a lot of environmental hazards that you can use against enemies, or you can just, kill yourself with if you're not careful. Surprisingly, wizards have a lot of utility with spells that can do basic things like make rain or make a character be able to jump 3 times as far. Mages aren't just stuck shooting magic missiles and giving characters defensive buffs. They're also sometimes actually necessary for exploration. It can also be pretty easy to miss things like this sequence where you talk to a brain near the start. You need someone with a high enough jump skill to get up there, and the fact there's a little bit of verticality to the areas is enough to throw anyone off who's used to playing a lot of CRPGs. One thing that is very similar to the old games, however, is the amount of loot you collect. It's not a ton, but everything you get feels significant. It's a good balance, and honestly, I think a lot of newer games could learn from it. In general, the game really emphasizes that it's a D&D game first, with stuff like actually rolling a virtual die when you need to do a skill check, or the way recovery works where you actually go to a uniquely instanced camp area rather than just press a button to rest. And also in keeping in D&D rules, many skills and spells can only be used once a day. Once the ability is used, you can't use it until you go back to a camp and end the day. Camp is pretty interesting too. It works pretty much the same as it did in Dragon Age Origins. It's the place where you can talk to your party members, get little bits of story before you go to sleep. And yes, you can romance party members if you want. Gives you a lot of freedom, depending on what you want to do. Side quests are everywhere. Some of them are really short. Others are a lot more involved. The way the game introduces side quests feels pretty natural most of the time. Like they're introduced in notes. Sometimes they start from NPCs just doing things that you can follow, or you'll get them from wandering like to random corners of the map. In general, the quality of voice acting also pretty impressive. Like even in utterly unimportant NPCs, like the voice acting is good. Along with, let's also say how good the character models are as well. Not everything looks great all the time. There are a couple of awkward animations, but when some random NPC talks to you, it's not just a series of canned animations, but animations made specifically for that character, and that is really impressive. Now, we got to talk about combat because there are some big changes here. Baldur's Gate 3 is turn-based, and that is not how the originals were. The originals had real time with pause, whereas this game is just standard turn-based. Like the Divinity Original Sin games both had turn-based combat, so it's not much of a surprise that Larian did what works for them. And also, those are fantastic games, so I'm certainly not upset with it. However, you will notice that this game, compared to other Larian games, has very fast combat. It might seem like a minor thing, but the speed your characters perform actions and move around is a real breath of fresh air for a turn-based combat game. At this point, we're used to a lot of waiting around, characters moving, then stopping, then attacking slowly, then game stopping for the AI to figure out his next move. There's not a lot of that here. It feels very fluid and very fun, and even in early access. And you get tons of options right out of the gate with your combat. Like being able to fully move, get an attack, and free action every turn is really nice when compared to like the shared movement and attack points of previous Larian games. You don't have to worry about not being able to attack if you move too far in this game as well, so moving around the battlefield is something you can freely do, rather than the standard tactic in the Divinity games, where you kind of stand in place and hoard as many action points as you can. That is not to say this is an easy game, though. Combat, it can be pretty lethal. It was like that in the previous Larian games, and it is like that here. If you want a challenging CRPG experience, this is the game to play. Enemies can kill you fast if you're not careful, and the smart application of your abilities can turn a tough battle into something much more manageable. That is to say, be strategic, man. I chose to play as a cleric, and they're usually pretty all-around good class in D&D, and I wasn't disappointed by that. Even though your character starts out very measly at level 1, you've got a good selection of spells, and you can make some meaningful choices in combat right from the start. Stealth, also very, very expanded here compared to the old games. Outside of giving enemies vision cones, like in Divinity Original Sin 2, you can also hide in dark places. Combine that with magic that can distract enemies, and you have a ton of options that you can sneak. And comparing this to basically any other CRPG I've ever played, very, very good. You can turn this game into a top-down stealth game in some parts. Speaking of top-down, let's talk what this game looks like. It is incredible looking on full settings, like genuinely just right up there with AAA studio output with facial modeling and animations. Environments, just fantastic, although we have encountered a couple of graphical bugs. Again, early access build is kind of expected, but it is something to keep in mind. That said, the amount of detail is almost overwhelming in this game. Combined with all the various things you can click on and interact with, you're definitely going to miss a few things. Thankfully, there is a highlight interactable objects button. You just press Alt, that's it. Because without that, I think you'd probably lose a lot of stuff in the environment. Again, detail-oriented. The big set-piece moments feel like something out of a modern BioWare game rather than one of the old ones. The fact they're able to combine these huge events while also having classic CRPG gameplay honestly impresses me, like, just on its own. But to sum up, this is an early access game, but what is on offer at this very moment is really impressive, and there is a decent amount of it. Everything that we have seen points to this game being a step up for Larian Studios. Like, they are progressing like a studio should, and this is really a phenomenal game so far, especially for an early access title. Does it feel like a Baldur's Gate game? It's a little bit harder to say that. It does get across the D&D feeling, but it also does feel more like Larian than Black Isle or BioWare. I mean, it starts with an exploding brain spaceship being attacked by dragons and demons. It's a lot wilder than the relatively sedate stories of the first two Baldur's Gate games. We love those games, but this is also a crazier take on D&D and feels new and fresh, to be completely honest. It's not all high concept stuff, though. The subtler things are well written and interesting as well, especially the dialogues with your companions at the camp. They are immediately unique and interesting. Like, interpersonal conflicts play out in a way that kind of feels natural, especially for a game like this. Still, game does have some noticeable bugs and some wonky visuals, and again, early access. It's only partially done. Larian says not to expect the full game for at least another year, so it's really important to consider that when you do see these kind of little mess-ups. I guess it depends on the type of person you are. Are you okay with playing the game early, knowing that it is a little rough around the edges, absorbing the content as it gets added, or do you want to play the game as a complete thing right from the start? I have a feeling, to some extent, it may even end up feeling a little bit like an episodic game as they add more content, which wouldn't be the worst thing. I like episodic games because I like having the game sort of spread out over time. It gives you time to process story stuff. But at the same time, it's also a Baldur's Gate game, not a Telltale game. And if you do want to wait, at least you won't have to pay more for the finished game. Larian released the game into early access at full price, so there will not be a price hike at the end of the campaign, but also there's no savings for early adopters. Kind of both a pro and a con. Ultimately, I have to say, this is a great game. For me, I'm kind of digging that they've done what they've done with Baldur's Gate, but I sense that there may be some people that don't agree with that. So from my perspective, it's one to buy. I've gotten a ways in. I'm not all the way through the 25 hours. I certainly want to play more of it. I will definitely go through the entire game. It is engaging. Larian Studios is just fantastic. And I'm excited. I'm really excited. It's fun. And if you out there played it, though, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Do not forget to enable all notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.